Okay, AFC West, home of the Raiders.
The Raiders.
Raider Nation. Since the passing of Al Davis, the Raiders have played exactly one full season, and Al Davis' son, whose name I can't remember right now, took over the reins and found out quickly how hard it is to be the head coach and the owner and the
Al's
NFL
turning
team.
over in his grave.
I know.
He's broken his glasses with the chains on him at least 3 times.
They
That's how badly they
I
played.
think they should have kept the head coach, but what's his son's name anyway? Al Jr.? Myron?
Sounds good to me.
All right, his son, canned the head coach, who had, I think, a reasonably successful season. So
The guy
if he
who-
wanted to make the team his own team and put his own imprint on it, fine. But it was an imprint of losing, which reversed what was looking like a hopeful situation. Now they've gone through Carson Palmer, haven't they?
Yes, they have.
So he's
Carson's in Arizona.
good for him. And the Raiders have
We spent so much time talking about that team.
The Raiders, they have got 2 records in recent memory in the NFL. One is year after year after year, they lead the league in penalties, which is a sign of lack of discipline. And then the other thing is they've got the most consecutive seasons with like 10 losses. I mean, you got to go back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 70s to match that record. And that, the whole NFL season was shorter back then. So they've got an amazing record of futility. If you believe in the cycle theory of the NFL and of sports and life in general and how the draft and free agency tend to equalize things, as long as you don't make draft picks like Jamarcus Russell, the Raiders are due. They are certainly due for a reversal.
They're not our
fortune.
parents. They're not our parents' Raiders, and they're certainly not the Raiders when we were kids because they were winners. When you had chubby little John Madden running up and down the field out there, and you had players like Kenny the Snake at quarterback, and you had Cliff Branch, and you had all these other guys, Hendricks. Yeah, they were scruffy. They were long-haired. They were smoking cigarettes on the sideline. The team had character, and they were criminals, and they didn't even care. Al Davis created the one NFL franchise that was absolutely the biggest group of degenerates, but they were good degenerates, at least on the football field. It fit. They could punch, and they could scratch, and they could gouge, and they could plug, and you know what? It worked. And they completely, I couldn't agree. It makes no sense. They completely lost who they were. They don't know how to win anymore. They don't know how to dominate. They should be ashamed to wear black and silver because they could have a team come in like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the last couple of years wearing their throwback creamsicles, and they kicked their ass. And how does that look? Especially to the non-sayer, to the surveyor, to the one passing by that knows nothing about football. How can these mean-looking guys with fans who have chains and helmets and look like something out of Mad Max be such losers?
The Raiders fans are among the best in the NFL.
Oh, they're loyal.
If you go to a Raiders game, you better take your earplugs, and that may not even be enough. You sit in the black hole, and you're in for it. You're ready. Don't even think of wearing an opposing team's jerseys to a Raiders home game. You might as well just jump off a cliff. But as long as you wear your Raiders gear, you will be among friends. You will be celebrated.
They'll beat anyone. They'll plunge at anyone, huh?
You get there 3 hours before the game for some serious tailgating. You may not even know your last name by the time you walk into the stadium. But it won't matter anymore as long as you know that you're at home for the Raiders.
Have you
games.
personally...
No, it's too loud for me. But if I were going to go to a Raiders game, I would certainly wear the Raiders gear, and I'd go tailgate for a few hours, and I'd be obliterated by the time I get in.
Well, I could see the California sun has absorbed your head. I can tell.
I got to tell you a story, Joey. Back when the Raiders were in Los Angeles, this goes back, I think, to the early 90s, I was visiting a friend, and we got tickets to a Raiders home game. They were playing, I think it was the Chicago Bears, I think it was the 3rd week of the season. It was still hot, right? This is before we had our recent climate change thing. And by the start of the 3rd quarter, the Raiders were getting their ass absolutely kicked, and the fans had basically lost interest in the game. Now, we had bought cheap seats, and so we were sitting among the other people, ruffians and hooligans, and basically Raiders fans that had also bought cheap seats because couldn't afford anything better. And
ruffians they are.
By this time, most of the people, for like thousands of fans around us, were, like I said, bored with the game. The sun was beating down on us all. There was alcohol on the breath of virtually everybody, and a lot of pot on the breath of at least half of them. So people were in quite a mood. Now, start of the 3rd quarter, hundreds, and by that I mean hundreds, of LAPD officers started streaming into the stadium. Black shirts, black pants. They're all 6'4". They look like they stepped out of a bodybuilding competition or something. I mean, these guys,
goodness.
they didn't look like Chicago cops who were like.
So they were still in
54
LA at the time. They hadn't made the
That's right,
the pilgrimage back to Oakland.
And I said, why are all these cops coming into the stadium? Well, I'll tell you what happened. You want to know what happened? Shortly after that, the fans were loving the opportunity to harass some cops. And so what do? They I don't know how they started it, but it happened in multiple places, including not too far from us, down in front. And the fans would, maybe like 2 fans get in a fight just to attract the cops, and then as soon as the cops came over, 50 fans around them would wail on the cops, and they'd swear at them, and they'd shout at them, and they'd throw their beers at them, and I remember
dousing them with
beer, and I remember
libations,
seeing
that's what I
one
thought.
cop, he just had his baton, and he was raising it up over his head, and he was smashing somebody with it, and it was just like a free-for-all. I mean,
Go back to Oakland.
it was violence by the police against the fans, and I think that if the police had just stayed out of the stadium, none of this stuff would have happened. But that was the good old days back in.
Are you trying to tell me that the fans are much more victorious than the actual team, and much tougher also?
They had fewer penalties than the team back then, and
They could block, they could pass.
They
They were hitting their targets.
They would hit their targets. They scored.
Pathetic.
The fans scored, and you know, what can I say? The Raiders didn't score much that day. So since they moved back to Oakland, things have been different. They, of course, 10 years ago, they made it to the Super Bowl, the John Gruden years, with the quarterback whose name I can't remember, Rich.
You know, it was coming to me last night, and I want to say...
Gannon. Was it Gannon?
It was Rich Gannon.
All right, quarterback of the Raiders. Now, that was 10 years ago. The glory days of the Raiders.
Well,
we're still waiting for him to
best,
come
it was
back.
a mediocre quarterback.
No, he was
the
very
game
good.
plan was terrific.
He was very good, but they got smoked by Tampa Bay. Anyway, it just, Raiders are a great example of why it's so hard to win in the NFL. And actually, they've set a record, like I said, for losing on a super consistent basis for about a decade in the NFL. You really have to put all the pieces together. You cannot afford to have bad chemistry in the locker room, players that are prima donnas, players that put themselves above the interests of the team. Remember, Joey, there is no I in team. But there's been a lot of I in the Oakland Raiders lately. The day they get that changed and turned around will be the day they get team chemistry back and the day that they return to prominence in the AFC West. But for now, it's another rebuilding year for the Oakland Raiders.
Al Davis did a lot for the NFL, and before that he did a lot for the AFL. When the Oakland Raiders were one of 8 teams that came out in 1960 and were established and were part of the American Football League, later to become the AFC, all of those teams. Al Davis wanted more than anything to be the president, and when he was not made the president, then of course there was some dissension and he had lost a lot of interest as far as being a team player. How I segue that in. But once Al Davis passed away, and especially the last couple of years of his life in Oakland, the team changed incredibly and in a very, very bad way. So now we have a situation where Al would always give, and more than any other NFL team, he gave players, with whatever problems they had, a second chance. And they would come to Oakland, and they would play for the Raiders, whether they were the LA Raiders or the Oakland Raiders, and he had some way of putting a semblance and getting the most out of that player. When you say names like Marcus Allen, when you say names like Jim Plunkett, these are players that had another opportunity to be football players and to be respectable and to be part of the NFL. And now, you're right, the last thing Oakland needs is to continue to draft or trade for prima donnas, because they have lost the essence, the absolute essence of who they are. And it's so bad that they're the exact opposite, as I've described, of the first 40 years of their existence, which was, we will gouge, we will cheat. And Al Davis made it clear. Number 1 rule, Matt Millen said, playing for the Oakland Raiders, the number 1 rule playing for them: whatever you got to do, win the game. Cheat if you have to. Number 2 rule, refer to number 1. Just win, baby. They don't know how to do it. They don't want to gouge anymore. They don't want to fight. They don't want to scurry. They don't want to be the bad boys in the NFL. And so they've lost their identity, and it's a big deal to me. And I keep talking about it because it's all about the cycles and it's all about the identity.